The impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine reverberated across the world, with everything from food, metal to oil soaring to unprecedented levels. If you look at the agri sector alone, from sunflower oil to wheat, prices are on fire, world numbers from one crisis to another. However, much before the pandemic, commodity prices were already seeing some historic highs. The world looks for stable food supplies. India is in a unique position, but can we make the most of it? What are the opportunities for India and the threats as the world, rebounding from a pandemic, grapples with shocks? We are joined by a very special panel to discuss this. It's my pleasure to welcome Rajesh Ranjan, founder and CEO of Krishify, Siraj A Chaudhry, managing director and CEO at the National Commodities Management Services Limited, Moiz Chunawalla, director sales, Allana Group, Kamal Jain, partner, risk advisory practice, KPMG in India, and Pankaj Khandelwal, MD and chairman, INR Farms. Thank you all for joining. Jen, let me come straight to you first and try and get a sense of, uh, what is it that we are seeing around the world? What is contributing to this boom that we are seeing in commodities? Everything from agri to food. We are seeing price rallies everywhere. And while we are at it, the second part to my question probably would be, uh, while there is a windfall clearly, does this translate for farmers, producers? What does it mean for them?
So absolutely, the point is that there is so much of macroeconomic factors which are impacting this. So there are multiple things, right? So when we look at edible oil as a business, because of the ban that has happened in Indonesia, there is a lot of uncertainty in terms of the availability of crude oil for import into India, and India imports probably the maximum in the world. So they are the number one importer of edible oil. So a lot of the macroeconomic factors, whether it's about fertilizers, whether it's about edible oil, so all of these factors and uncertainties that exist because of the geopolitical tension have actually impacted India. Firstly, in terms of the prices. So definitely the prices have gone up significantly. Also, from the fact that whether there is an opportunity, that still is debatable, because the fact is that this is probably more, not to do with the, let's say, farmers directly, but a lot to do with the supply chain and what the economic factors impacting the prices, have occurred. So I think it's not very directly relatable to the farmers, but in the entire supply chain is really the impact.
Right. Business impact probably is debatable. Mr. Chaudhary, if I can come to the war in Europe, China's COVID curbs, the supply chain chaos that we have all seen. Okay, it's creating record rally for commodities. How's India placed both in terms of domestic markets and export?
I'll step back a bit. I think one of where this whole crisis started, the war actually has brought it to a tipping point, but it actually started during COVID, when there was an easing of monetary policies, and that happened globally. And this is typically, again, what happened in 2008, and that is a common link between commodity price cycles going up then and it is happening now. So this process of commodity price cycles going up actually started much before the Russian Ukraine war event happened. And in the last 1 year, even prior to this war, which was say February 2022, this price rise had been witnessed. What has now happened is that typically what we say is that the cure for high prices, when high prices encourage the farmer to produce more, and therefore in a year or two, the cycle sort of turns around and the prices normalize. Typically, the high price cycles last shorter than the low price cycles, which we had been witnessing, say, 2 years ago and earlier than that. What this has done is actually what I would call make a perfect storm, where you have a commodity price cycle which was anyway high thanks to the easing monetary policies. Then comes the war. There were weather disruptions in certain key agriculture geographies, and that was all compounded by the supply chain disruptions that happened thanks to COVID and the whole scenario that played out. So how does it affect India? The good news is that India, by and large, historically has been, from a food perspective, a self-sufficient country. Unlike China, which is dependent heavily on imports for various food needs, or there are countries like Brazil and Indonesia which are dependent on exports for keeping their agriculture flourishing. India is actually, by and large, a self-sufficient country, barring edible oils and to a certain extent pulses. That gap has been narrowed over the years. So purely from a domestic consumption and demand perspective, India is well secured, and we witnessed some of that during the COVID times when the government had the liberty to give out free grains to a large population without really causing a ripple in the stock situation. What this current situation has done is that suddenly the world has discovered and strategic markets which were particularly dependent on Ukraine and Russia, which are dominant suppliers of certain key cereals and oils. Those markets were suddenly in shortage of supplies, or the supplies were at risk. And when they looked around, they found a country which is self-sufficient and had certain stocks, particularly of wheat, maize, sugar, which are typically the surplus commodities here. And those were the commodities that started finding more traction and demand. So this is an opportunity for India, though I would say it's a limited time opportunity, because we are also a country which is in need of keeping the food price inflation low. And when you have a situation like this, there is a run on prices, not purely about it is about demand coming in and taking up prices. It is the anticipation of demand which spurs the market, and therefore anybody who tries to own the commodity, even if they do not yet have the means to let go of it. But the build up to the demand also creates that inflation, and that is what we are witnessing today. So it's a perfect storm of things which has come together. Logically and normally one would have said that the next crop season things should normalize, and that would have kept the bullish aspirations under some kind of tempering. But at this point of time, that is not playing out, because there is uncertainty around the war and everything that is linked to it. And the other input other factor which is contributing to it is the fact that the input costs for agriculture have gone up. So that's a separate topic in itself, which is the fertilizer cost, the freight costs, and all those. So those are obviously keeping the costs of doing business here higher than what they were a couple of years ago.
So fertilizer and input costs, I think that
fertilizer and freight because of the
So I think that we'll talk about it due course. Moiz, you guys are one of the leading exporters of agri commodities. Given the rally, how is business shaping up for you guys? And is it happy business for you guys? And like Mr. Chaudhry mentioned, supply chain issues. Are you feeling pressures of that?
So the rally has been fantastic. The demand for agri commodities, if I may take the example of wheat, which we are amongst the largest exporters for. In the last year, we exported about 150,000 tons of wheat out of India. And the demand this year looks at almost about 1 million tons. So that's a substantial increase in demand for wheat as a commodity. And if you talk about supply chain issues, the major issue that we face is today on warehousing and silo storage infrastructure, which in case the demand for these commodities remains sustainable and, in the future, if it remains sustainable and strong, we may have to basically look at improving our storage and warehousing infrastructure in India.
Right. Pankaj, similar question to you. How has business been? I know you do business of it. And what is it that you are seeing?
Right. The horticulture space, which is what we are part of, I would say it's been a mixed bag. Well, on one side, clearly the prices are going up, but as Siraj mentioned, it's actually more the supply chain costs that are going up, whether it is packaging costs, whether it is logistics costs. So at the end of the day, the consumer is paying much higher, but the price pressure actually is coming back onto the farmer, because at the end of the day, markets absorb only so much, and the variability in terms of the demand. So while at one level you see a higher demand coming up, the prices going up, but actually I would say the price realization at the farm gate in horticulture commodities that we've been part of, I actually see a slightly downward trend. except for commodities like pomegranate, where there's major shortage of production in the first place in India, right? So it's a multiple set of factors which are coming into saying this. So grapes, for example, has been a complete disaster out of India this time around. So it's a multiple set of issues. There's no one answer to that because the disruptions are very significant. In certain sectors, you're seeing growth. Something like banana, again, long distance suppliers like Philippines and Ecuador suffered immensely because of the supply chain disruption, and that opportunity for India was immense. I mean, the industry itself has grown more than 100% year on year, right? Becoming one of the large players in Middle Eastern market into a commodity where we were not a player earlier, right? So a lot of these things have actually, the answers depend on each commodity. What are the sources? What are the destination that one is talking about? And in some cases, it's created once in a lifetime opportunity. In other cases, it's been a disaster. So it's a mixed bag as far as the horticulture sector is concerned.
Mixed bag. And you did mention, the Middle East, but any new markets that you are seeing opening up for India when it comes to horticulture?
That's actually right. Again, I will pick up from what Siraj had mentioned, that the world really has opened up to India for various reasons, such as in terms of relative stability of availability of products, a market which is clearly fairly self-sufficient in its own requirements, and therefore the earlier set of issues which were there, which are largely non-tariff barriers that India had to face immensely into large number of countries, those seem to be not really a very significant part of what is getting played out, right? Almost everyone is figuring out a way of making these things work, rather than figuring out that's not the reason why India can be a player into it, right? So the tone, the language, the approach to India is a very fundamental shift that we are seeing, I would say largely into Middle East and Europe at this point of time. Could also be a bias because that's where these are the markets that we work quite aggressively on. But at least in these two large geographies that we are seeing, there's a very positive approach towards India, looking at it as a strategic long-term partner, thinking of it as an alternate supply base, even if in long term these things do balance out and things come to some kind of stability, they cannot get into a similar situation ever again, right? So it's a strategic shift, it's a risk mitigation strategy that people are talking about. So India has going forward a very important role to play.
Right. Rajesh, if I can come to you, the world is looking at India in terms of, food stock. But, the sector still has pain points: volatility in input prices, inefficient cropping, inefficient post-harvest supply chain, lack of access to financial solutions, lack of market access. I can probably go on. The question probably now is that, can and does Agritech have a role to play in addressing some of these pain points at least?
Right. So, see, if we see, most of these problems are very, very at the farmer level, while other stakeholders in the agricultural ecosystem are also involved. But if we see from the farmers level, from the farmers' point of view, so information asymmetry is a very, very big problem, right? So whatever we are doing, whatever is happening in the industry, right, be it more efficient cropping methods, be it better input availability, better supply chain infrastructure, if there is available at all, right? So that information in the right way is not reaching to the farmers, right? And there are a lot of factors behind it. One is, what are the information channels that currently are being used? So the robustness of the communication channel is a big factor there. Apart from that, robust infrastructure availability for farmers. So for example, whenever we talk about farmers getting the right price for their harvest, so are their harvests reaching to the right place, right, at the right time? And that kind of, so and again, there are multiple facets of that problems. First of all, could be rural logistical infrastructure, right? Another problem that Indian agriculture faces, that probably we cannot do anything about it, is small landholding, right? So there is so fragmented, farmers growing different things, right? And small packets of harvest, getting that to the right place in itself is a big challenge. What Agritech can do into it is, first of all, bridging that information gap, right? That's the simplest thing we can do. And thanks to the internet infrastructure that has been built in this country for the masses, right? Including the rural audience today, the way they are using smartphones, and we are seeing that trend on Krishify, right? So that information symmetry thing can be achieved, right? Second is providing robust infrastructure around supply chains and availability, better availability of input products. Again, technology has a big role to play there, and there are a lot of companies who have taken steps into it, and we can see that trend happening, making real change, which is visible to everyone in the world, right? And that will start happening very, very soon, right? So in pockets, if we see, so there are a lot of regional players in north, in south, who have started taking a lot of interest into it and started building those infrastructures. So that we'll see happening. When it comes to credit availability, right, or financial help availability, so for that, see, that in transactional information, right, among the farmers, that needs to be digitized, right? Currently, most of the transactions at farmer level are at least flowing offline and in cash. So unless that information is digitized, that is not possible, right? Because you need something, some sort of a parallel to civil for farmers, right? So again, to digitize that, intrusion of or efforts of Agritech players are required, right? Where you and some kind of a platform play, so a platform that captures these transactions and regular interaction with the farmers, be it around their input needs, be it around their supply chain or post harvest needs, would be required. And given that currently more than 100 funded Agritech startups, right, who are taking different approaches, and that's another good thing to see, right? Everybody is taking a different approach altogether to impact some part of the farmer's life. So I think, yeah, we are on a right trend, and in the coming years, a lot of very, very positive impact would be visible to the entire world.
Right. If I can stay in the similar line of conversation, Mr. Chaudhry, you've been around the agri sector for decades now. What are some of the problems that you think you have seen, in thousands and you are seeing in 2020? And what are the areas, especially when it comes to export, what are the areas where we can, quickly address some of these pitfalls?
So as I said earlier, that India has typically been self-sufficient, which means that you export only when you are producing something that you don't need, or producing more than what you need, which is when you see palm oil in Malaysia and Indonesia, or Ukraine and Russia were exporting. I mean, they obviously do not have as much population pressure. So what is important for India? I mean, I have not seen India, or I do not see India as a producer of commodities for the world. Because as has been mentioned, Rajesh mentioned it, and we all know that we are not the most efficient producers. I mean, our productivity is low, our the small land holdings, infrastructure for exports is weak. So all those things do not leave us very competitive relative to the world in the general, what I would call the broadacre crops, whether it's wheat, rice. Of course, we have an advantage because we are a leading rice producer, and that we've been able to maximize. So rice and sugar, which keeps moving from being an importer to an exporter, depending on how we produce that. I mean, the crop goes and what the government policies are. But we have to find our niches. I think we've had examples of Indian grapes finding acceptability, buffalo meat finding a large market. So and we have to then create that infrastructure, and to a certain extent, and I've been saying this for a long time, we have to create that brand India. So whether it is the Indian basmati, or it is the Indian turmeric, or Indian grapes, or and that is not something that we can leave it to the industry to do it. I mean, it is too much. I mean, building a brand or market presence in a country like India itself is tough. So imagine doing it for the world. So I do not expect any individual company to be doing it. And that is where, I mean, and we have examples of that. I mean, you have California nuts, and you have Washington apples, and, all kinds of different countries have marketed their produce. And therefore there is a need, maybe a collaboration between the Ministry of Commerce, External Affairs, and the private sort of producers to create that brand for various categories of products in India, and we could then be marketing it. What this current price situation and the shortage of supplies from the origins like US, UK, USSR, and I'm missing it, Russia and Ukraine are is causing is that it has actually opened the doors for India. I mean, earlier participants have also mentioned the same, that, earlier we had to go and sell, and there were barriers to entry, and there was obviously competitive pressure, and therefore people put up those barriers to say that, okay, India is not good, their pesticide residues, this is not good, that is not good. I think this is a great opportunity that we've got a foot in the door. Now, how do we maximize this? To do that, we will have to bring in efficiencies in our supply chain, our port infrastructure. I mean, we've talked about wheat storage, storage at the port not being enough, or, the availability of rakes the cost has to be managed. The whole supply chain costs cannot be a disadvantage. But what has happened is that this has opened a door for us to now keep that door open is a responsibility that we own. And I hope that the industry, the government, and everyone involved in this value chain works together to keep this door open and keep fueling it. So we may not be having as much demand, but we could be a regular supplier to some of the markets. I mean, I look at what, countries like Egypt or Middle East. I mean, Middle East was importing a lot of eggs, but hardly anything from India. Or Egypt was importing wheat and hardly anything from India. Now, these are things where we have now got a foot in the door. The markets are opening to us, and we need to ensure that they don't shut on us once the regular supplies are back. So it's an opportunity which needs to be leveraged, and we need to prepare ourselves to keep it sustainably going for a long time in the future.
Right. Mr. Jain, some of the things that Mr. Chaudhry talked about, where we have never been, seen as an exporter or an importer, especially when it comes to wheat. There has been also concerns around the quality of, Indian wheat. And then again, there are problems around regulations, which tend to change every season, which tend to change every year. One day you're allowed to export rice, one day you're not allowed to export rice. This much you can do in trade, that is what you cannot do. So while we're talking about, a foot in the door, do we have the legs to, win this race? It sounds like a race to me now.
I agree. So I think one example, Siraj, like you mentioned, there's the California nuts. I would say the Darjeeling tea, for example, right? So there are some products which are definitely known globally. But the right point is that it requires a force. And the force is actually a collective force of within the government, within the industry, to say that this is what we need to do. See, the difference between exports of agri versus exports of any other type of goods that India has, for example, gems, jewelry, or engineering items, etc. Right? So those are not necessities. For us as India, agri is a necessity. It has to be driven by what India first requires, and it is always going to be a secondary question in terms of what is available for exports, right? So the inconsistency of the supply that is available with the country kind of dampers the the brand image that you can project, that there is consistency. So, for example, North Africa was completely dependent on Ukraine till today in terms of the supply of wheat, right? Because of consistency of supply that was happening from there, and obviously there was an economic advantage as well. But would that be the case when they start depending on India? So it's like saying that, will India give me this much of crop or what is required consistently? And that will only depend on how India first consumes and has surplus to kind of export. So I think it's not a very easy answer to say that whether there will be a brand that can be created, but is that India is focusing on agriculture more now. If you see the GDP also, historically it was so high, it started going down. Now the GDP from agri is actually inching beyond 20% as well, right? So there is a focus to say that this becomes a revenue area for the country as well, and therefore more participation through the ecosystem. So maybe it's not a point at this time where we can say that there will be enough available and to create a brand, but the ideas and probably the industry is looking towards it, and hopefully at some point it will.
Right. Moiz, if I can come to you, everyone's talking about the opportunity. What is it that people like you, what is it that companies like you need now to take this opportunity with both hands? And what are the kind of problems that you are seeing?
So as of now, the major problem remains with, as I previously mentioned, storage infrastructure and warehousing. Apart from that, there is a global concern on a global shipping crisis, if I may say, wherein the availability of shipping containers and vessels has become a major problem. And, it's very difficult for us to calculate our prices based on uncertainty of the shipping industry. There is a huge shortage of shipping containers and space on vessels that is creating a big issue. That is the main concern for us as of now.
And what's happening with wheat? I think everyone's now wondering, what has the Indian summer done to wheat cultivation? How much will we end up exporting? How much will we have enough for domestic consumption? What is happening there?
So I think that we estimated about 10 million metric tons of wheat to be exported in this financial year. We'll come close to that. There is some amount of the heat wave has created some kind of reduction in the crop yield, but definitely I think that we will reach the required numbers, which at least our company is able to procure the 1 million tons that we have targeted this year. And I think pretty much India will achieve the targeted 10 million metric tons that it has looked at.
10 million in wheat. Pankaj, what are the challenges you guys face? What can be done to increase India's share in horticulture? Last year was very good. This year you're saying is sort of a mixed bag. How can we improve that situation?
See, the fundamental problem remains around the global supply chain issues, right? Especially on the shipping lines. Air freight was anyway also a serious problem. And given that these are perishables, time to market is obviously the most important thing. That remains uncertain. What I foresee is that the commodities which continue to gain from this shift will continue to grow faster. So commodities like onion, banana, which clearly we have a specific advantage driven purely from a supply chain proximity to these markets, will continue to do very well. Products like grapes, where we are dependent on European market, long distance transportation, products which are dependent on air freight, right? They will continue to suffer. I do not see in next 12 to 15 months, at least the shipping lines easing out or any significant shift happening in terms of the flows of the containers, etc. So from that perspective, India will continue to gain the advantage as far as these commodities are concerned. But it really is a long-term opportunity. I think short-term, these pains would be there and we need to work with what we need to work with. But fundamentally, I really think that there's a strategic shift in the demand centers. They are looking at India strategically. There is a large amount of fund flows that are being planned. There are long-term strategic tie-ups, relationships, joint ventures at a micro level, because it's a very different approach that people are now taking, right? So I do think that it's a very, very long-term shift. There would be short-term pain that would come about as far as, but that's exactly what is creating the opportunity in the first place, right? So one can't crib much about the fact that global shipping lines are, or the world is going through what it is going, but I actually think it's a long-term shift. We are getting into, from a production side, also actually India is getting into an excess production space, which was never there, right? I think if you just look at last 10 to 15 years, most of the commodities, horticulture has overtaken, the cereals as a total production over last 5 years or so. So all these things put together, I think we are, despite all the issues in the Indian production system, we are getting into a phase where more production is coming up. And the shift in the demand, just purely from a strategic perspective, is going to create opportunities. But the answers would lie into niche products where India has the supply chain capability as well as the production capability. And we are not threatened by the food security in the Indian context, because naturally that is and that would be the first priority for the government. I mean, there's no way you can export in case the prices of wheat and rice go up in India. There's no way out of that. And it shouldn't be. I don't see a reason why it should be.
So, Rajesh, if I can come to you, there are two parts of this question. What are the key drivers, according to you, for Agritech? And secondly, what are the different kinds of technologies that we can see in the agri-tech space, if you had to help out Pankaj and Moiz who are in the business now, what is it that you will promise? What is it that you will offer?
Right. So, key drivers for agri tech. So, I'll say acceptance of digital platforms and technology, right? Not just by the farmers, which was not so trivial, quite a few years ago, but also by the other stakeholders in the agri ecosystem, be it manufacturers, be it, distributors or brands or companies, right? Whoever is dealing in that. So acceptance of these platforms and technologies is one of the major factors, right? So now, people are thinking about it. So we address the problem, and then there is some role of technology in improvement of agriculture overall. We all know and we have accepted that, right? So when there is a need and there is a very clear need, so we do have, tech talent, and people who are not from agricultural background, right? But they are coming in the tech industry, in this industry, and trying to build different solutions. Second important factor, I believe, is recent interest of the VC ecosystem to infuse capital in agri-tech companies, right? Again, that was not very. There were quite a few VCs, but 4-5 years ago, this was not so. There were different industry in tech ecosystem that were evolving, but agri-tech was not one of the major ones. When in the last 2 years, if we see the trend, how much VC money has kind of gone into agri-tech startups, so that's really amazing, and we can only see a positive trend there, right? So these two, I would say, are very important factors. What kind of technologies are now getting built? So as I mentioned earlier, we will have to see it at a very different stakeholder level. So at farmer level, if we see, so access to information or access to better input, right, or better supply chain and infrastructure for them to gain more from what they are currently kind of manufacturing, producing. And then once we have optimized that, right, so how to increase their production? And for that, we are seeing, again, kind of adoption of new technologies. So one is mechanization, right? So access to machinery at low cost or, easy accessibility of the same. So that is one aspect. Second aspect is data, right? Which is very important. So again, the kind of data we can generate with these digital platforms with the uses of technology, and then we can use artificial intelligence, machine learning to take meaningful insights out of that, basis which farmers can take better decisions, right? Basis which manufacturers and other players in the industry, like veterans in the industry, can take better decisions in terms of manufacturing, in terms of distribution of their products, right? Also in terms of better supply chain to get the best value for the commodities, right? So I think data has a big role to play there. Then precision farming. So we are seeing now a lot of companies, again, due to small land holding, right? Precision farming is not so prevalent in our country as of now, but there is a need, and we are coming up with new solutions, right? So, for example, uses of drones on larger farms is much easier and economical, right, as compared to smaller farms. But we'll have to come up with those kind of innovations where we can make it kind of sustainable and feasible even for small landholdings, smaller farms, right? IoT innovations, again, to help farmers get to know exactly what's the problem in which part of their land.
Mr. Jain, if I can come to you, completely different topic. Another area which I think Chaudhry also talked about in his opening input is we're seeing record input prices like fertilizer. What can be the impact of such price rise for India and on crops, along with the uncertainty of crop prices, input costs, and local politics? I think fertilizer prices and input prices are also something which is not really talked about too much, but it's there, right?
Absolutely. It's a big risk also from the fact that there is again dependency on the imports of some of these materials, for example, non-urea fertilizers, DAP, etc. Right. So Russia, for example, again was one of the providers of fertilizers, 13% of the production of the world. So what it happens is that the input cost for the farmers increases, and he has only this much of budget to actually spend. And that actually then reduces the, let's say, the amount of crop that he can grow, because he has a limited resource that he has. So ultimately, for whatever cost that is being incurred by the farmer, it is impacting the farmer as well, and indirectly again, not only that part of it, right? The entire supply chain also, the fuel cost, freight cost, everything that was being discussed. All of these actually then will impact the prices in such a way that the inflation will happen and the prices are going to be high. So definitely this, while we don't know whether this is a temporary phenomena or to last for how long, but it's definitely impacting the overall ecosystem.
Right, Mr. Chaudhry, I think the elephant in the room for quite some time has been weather, and that has probably become even more intense now, given what we saw over the last month or so across North India and the impact on crops like wheat. Uh, Increasingly, do you think weather will have a larger role to play? And does that make life more difficult in terms of planning and what we can do and what we can't?
Weather has always been a factor. I mean, particularly for India, where almost 60% agriculture is dependent on sort of non-irrigated water supply, non-irrigation, or rather the natural water supply. It has always been a factor. So, and we've, for the last few years, it has been impacting crops. I mean, we've had scenarios where there were rains when the crops were actually standing, lack of rains when the crops needed it. So this whole impact of climate change, which the world talks about and hasn't yet done a lot about, is a factor or is a risk that is there with us to stay. What has made things worse this year is that when everything else is making life tough, weather also comes to play its role and doesn't want to be left ignored, is what we are seeing today. So what we've seen with the excess heat in the early part of the season, what it has done is it has actually deteriorated the quality of wheat, which is essentially shrinking the grain. And to a certain extent, that has reduced a certain amount of wheat production. But given that we are still a hugely surplus wheat country, just having enough to export and still keeping decent stocks, I don't think it's a cause for concern. It is probably a reduction in our expectations, but it is not a crisis. What is happening, though, is that there are other parts of the world which are undergoing the phenomena of La Nina, and that is going to be affecting the crops in the US, in South America, as well as in Australia. So these are the other suppliers to these very markets, for wheat in particular, or in, say, oil seeds and corn, maize, as we call it here. So those are all the crops which will bear some impact of the weather which is happening around the world. And these are all crops where we are interconnected and therefore will have their bearing on India, which is saying that, okay, if the world prices of corn go up, there will be a demand for Indian maize. And if there is an export demand for Indian maize, the Indian maize prices will go up. If Indian maize prices will go up, then Indian poultry prices will go up. So it's a vicious cycle that comes into play, and weather certainly has an impact. But the differentiating point is that the weather has always been a factor. It is just that a lot more factors have come into play now. So we have to be watchful. As of now, everything looks fine for India in terms of its oncoming monsoons. And they are very critical because a lot of Indian agriculture depends on that. So to that extent, I think at this point of time, there is less concern from weather for India. Not to say that everything is perfect or will go perfect, but for the rest of the world, it is becoming a concern, and that will have a bearing on the commodity prices in India.
Right, Moiz and Pankaj, I would like you to weigh in, especially when it comes to weather and say prices of fertilizer. If you want to go first.
See, so, in terms of the cost of production, fertilizers in the horticulture sector is actually a relatively less critical factor. And it's only in relative sense that I'm talking about compared to, because insecticide, pesticide, chemicals, they also form a significant part of what farmer needs to put in. At the same time, there is a significant difference in terms of the risk profile is very different. So it's not a choice that the farmer would have, and it's a plantation crop. So the nature and the behavior is definitely different. Puts a lot of pressure onto the farmer without doubt, and you have no clarity on what exactly is going to happen at the time of harvest, right? So they still need to work within the budget, but it's a very different kind of pressure that the farmer needs to operate in. They may not have a choice not to use the farm inputs that need to put in place. The labor costs, etc., anyway, are going up at all points. So the cost structure is changing fundamentally at the ground level itself. But to me, I don't think the farmer can change much in the horticulture side. It's not a choice not to use it. It's more a function of taking higher amount of risk, and depending on how the markets are going to play out, it could actually be a significant problem for the farmer, right? And the same thing goes. The climate is fundamentally in the same way linked with what I'm basically. There's a significant incidence of pests and diseases. The costs actually go up significantly, right? So to me, it's not de-linked. Both the 2 points are in some way linked, and fundamentally, it is actually increasing the risk for the farmer in a way that the farmer is not comfortable in a sector which the risks and the reward profile do not match in any case, right? So it's a complex problem to solve as far as horticulture is concerned.
So, Rajesh, if I can come to you, what are the learnings and best practices that we can pick up from other countries who have also seen Agritech? What are some of the things that we can pick up?
So there can be some overall underlying factors that have impacted the growth of agritech industry in other countries, right, and their impact on the overall improvement in, I would say, the industry in agriculture, right? But we'll also have to factor out countries where we see similar kind of agricultural trends, similar kind of infrastructure ecosystem that they have evolved from, right? And one of the major important factors is the size of land holding. One important factor is literacy, right? Because how much farmers can so for example, let's say if we start comparing with countries like US, where we see very large land holding overall and use of precision farming, which is very, very prevalent now, right? So similar kind of trend we cannot see immediately in India, right? So that will take time, and there is a natural progression of how technological involvement will happen in impacting the agricultural industry in our country, right? So some of the learnings that we can take, right? So first of all, just the introduction of technology, right, in terms of digital platforms, how we can access data and how we can process that to empower the entire ecosystem, right? Second is how can we build better infrastructures, right, to support better supply chains, be it on the export side, be it on the input side, be it on the, just at a very, very micro level, if we say, so from farm to fork or farm to market that we talk about, right? So even that is not happening in a very, very efficient way, right? So I think first we'll have to solve those aspects, and then we will get into technologies that will help impact the, overall production per acre kind of metric, right? So where we need to kind of have better so for example, if we talk about Israeli technologies in terms of poly houses or hydroponic or aquaponic kind of thing, right? So the kind of cost that goes into building that kind of infrastructure, are Indian farmers ready to invest those kind of money, right? Or are they getting enough support to build those infrastructures, right? So I think there are a certain level of problems, overall standardization that we first need to do, and then we will get into solving bigger problems, which is increasing overall production metrics. So I think that's how it should go.
Right. So I think we're running out of time. So last question, let's reverse the process and keep with you, Rajesh. It seems we are self-sufficient when it comes to domestically. So, but a lot of opportunities when it comes to export. So from someone who is in the agri-tech space, what would you, be able to give the exporters so that we can capitalize on this?
So I think some parts of this Mr. Moiz has already kind of covered. So you'll have to see what is stopping us to export more now. right? And fundamentally, there can be only two things, two ways to look at it. One is increase the production, right? So that we have, commodities in surplus amount so that we can export, right? And second is how efficiently and smoothly we can export. So the infrastructure, as he mentioned, there is shipping problems, right? So you'll have to look at it from both aspects. One, at a very, very micro level, right? At farm level, how can we increase production? And starting with better advisory services, right? Better farm planning support, credit support, right? In order to, make our farmers experiment more, or at least, make them comfortable with new technologies, right? And then eventually adopting other countries' technologies to grow more and produce more, and then looking at the infrastructure level problems, how we can solve that, so that commodities, once we have in surplus, then we are easily able to export them as well.
Right. Moiz, if I can come to you, how long do you think this commodity rally will last? I know it's a little difficult question, but personally, how do you see this happening?
So I think this would be probably till the end of the year 2020. The harvesting season in some of the other competing agri-export countries like Australia will start in September, and that'll be the deciding factor of some of the commodities like wheat, what's going to be prices like, and and all of that depends on the harvesting in other countries. What is the crop situation going to be like? And based on that, there could be, definitely the rally, I think, would end probably at the end of the year.
Right. Pankaj, almost similar question to you. I know it's a mixed bag for horticulture, but especially when it comes to like banana and stuff like that, how long do you think the good days will last? And what are some of the other fruits where you see a lot of potential when it comes to export?
See, I think the global supply chain is not getting resolved within the next 12 to 15 months for sure. So from that perspective, I would say that it's definitely running into the next financial year as far as the disruptions are concerned, and then the consequently impact on specific commodities and products will continue to run. And again, I'm limiting myself to horticulture because the plays are very, very different for other commodities. I clearly see that is going to be the case. But I definitely think that it's a long-term thing where we will settle at a much higher level. It's not something that's going to go back to what it was 2 years ago in terms of the potential for India's export, right? So it's actually going to settle at a much higher level in terms of what we're calling as a stable level of exports out of India. So I'm long on this opportunity that has come up as far as is concerned, but the current one, crisis-driven opportunity, is definitely up for next 15 months at least.
After the next 15 months, Mr. Jain, a slightly different last question. I was reading this very interesting New York Times article. It says the era of cheap and plenty may be ending. Do you agree with such assessments, and are the changes that we see be irreversible?
So of course, I would take it positively that it is in the right direction. And just to answer the question that will we have, let's say, more exports? I would also say that we can reduce. What will India be producing after, let's say, next 5 years or 10 years? Will it be the same or will it be different? Because there's going to be definitely some change in the economics of what people are going to be and farmers are going to be growing, right? So, for example, there is also a lot of incentive by the government in terms of diversifications of crop. So, what is there's a crop diversification program, the agricultural exports, incentives. So, many of the government programs are actually also going to support in diverting the type of crops that India produces, right? And that's the reason why you might not have traditional rice, wheat, corn, etc. Excess available for exports. I think it also depends on the economics, frankly, in terms of what will benefit the farmers more in the times to come, and that will determine what is really available for export. So, that's what I believe.
Right. Mr. Chaudhry, last word to you, and a little bit of crystal ball gazing. How long do you see this panning out? And at the, what are the scope for India at the moment?
So I don't see this price rally. Typically, in a agriculture commodity price rally, you have a crop, and by the next crop things settle down because the farmers produce more. In this case, the major producing region for a number of commodities continues to be in distress, and therefore it is hard to predict that if the natural cycle of price correction is not going to happen. Then, of course, I mean, the weather and everything stays as the uncertain element, which is always there. But I would say that I would give it at least 12 months before we see. And of course, it is not a universal truth because every crop has its own dynamics, and there is impact of weather and supply chain and demand and supply. So, but the whole process of being prices being high, I think is a 12-month thing, because I would say it would require another crop cycle than the next crop cycle to correct things. For India, I think the important part is that this particular crisis around the world has shown us the potential of what we can do. As I said, it may have given us an opportunity to get a peep into what the world what place we could occupy in the world. It is an opportunity for us to look within and say that what can we change now to make this a more regular affair rather than just an opportunistic approach. So whether it, and the other change which has happened, and this is after many years, this is not the first time, but after a long gap, when I look at wheat, when I look at some of the other crops, where the inherent dependence of the farmer was really on government procurement. And that is a phenomena that has changed. This time, government procurement of wheat is coming in much lower than what it was in the past. The private sector has stepped in to buy wheat, is buying corn, will probably buy pulses. So all these things will then, when we talked about the farm laws earlier and saying that, okay, the private sector will open up, will reach the farmer and the government will sort of take that safety net away. Perhaps in the right environment, you will not need that safety net, and the private sector will come in and set itself up to create opportunities, build the necessary infrastructure, of course, with support from the government. So I think this has been a great window to the opportunity that we have all aspired for, and if used correctly, can provide a great opportunity for Indian agriculture to not just be thriving and surviving in India, but also be a producer for the world in specific crops and areas.
Wonderful. So a great window, lots of opportunity. Probably, like all our speakers have said, the natural cycle of price correction will not happen, and the rally would anyway last for 12 to 15 months. It has been a most fascinating discussion, and the topic, of course, is very fascinating, and we could have gone on and on, but thank you, gentlemen, for all joining us, and it was a real pleasure speaking to you all. Thank you so much.